Okay, welcome back. So today we're going through October-November 2022 question paper 13. So the same as question paper 12. Any questions that have come up in question paper 11, what I'll do for those is I will just circle the correct answer, and you can go back to question paper 11 for the full explanation if you need it. Okay, so we'll start at question 30. Just give me about 30 seconds to start there, and then we'll go through it. Okay, so question 30. What may be a cost to its home country when a multinational company expands abroad? Okay, so basically what's happening here is that the multinational company is leaving the home country. What's going to be a negative consequence of that? So the options that we have are increased competition from the MNC may force firms in the host country to close. Well, that's going to be wrong because we're talking about a negative consequence to the home country. And the fact that the MNC leaves is not going to force firms to close, because it's actually going to create less competition as they expand abroad, so as they go to another country. Many jobs created by the MNC may be low skilled, so that may be true, but that would be something that would affect the host country, the country that the MNC is moving to, not the country that the MNC has moved from. The MNC's profits from the host country may be sent to its home country. So in this case, that is something that will happen, but that's going to be a positive effect of the MNC moving abroad, not a negative effect. If a country from America goes to set up in Ireland, it's likely that at the end of the year they will return the profits back into America, where the MNC has their headquarters set up. So the correct answer here is a negative consequence for the home country. It may cause job losses in the home country by moving their production abroad. So although it won't increase competition, it will reduce competition. People who were working for the MNC previously may lose their jobs as they move from America into Ireland, for example. Okay, question 29. Country X produces cars and also imports cars. So they do both. They make cars themselves and they import them also. What group is least likely to benefit from the introduction of an import tariff on cars? So what we should remember from the previous videos is that what's an import tariff? An import tariff is a tax, and that's designed to increase the price of imports and to reduce the quantity that is being sold. So, will it be workers making cars in country X? No, they're not going to be affected. They import their own cars. So the people who are making cars or producing cars in their home country are not going to be affected by the import tariffs. Only if the import tariffs are on raw materials, etc. But we're not told that. We're told that it's the tariff on the cars themselves. The government of country X, they're not going to they may benefit through indirect taxes, etc. So there may be a possibility that that will actually be a positive effect for them. Therefore, they're not least likely to benefit. Now, the producers and consumers of cars is a little bit difficult. So the producers of cars in country X, they're least likely to benefit. Why? Because they're going to have the cars that they import at a higher price, which means that they'll have to sell at a higher price, and they will be able to sell less cars in country X than they were before the import tariff. The consumers are going to be the least likely to benefit because they will have to pay a higher tax on the imported cars that are sold in their country, and also due to the fact that imports will reduce the competition for domestic car producers, there is also the possibility that the price of cars domestically will increase also. So they'll get less choice and they'll get higher prices. That is for the consumers in the home country. Okay, 27 and 26. They're both from QP11, so go back to look for them. Correct answers are circled. Explanations are on the QP11 video. Question 26. What is the usual effect of net immigration for a high-income country? Okay, now remember, immigration, net immigration means more people in than people who are leaving the country. So what does that normally mean? Well, it's not going to mean reduced demand for housing. It's going to increase the demand for housing as we now have more people in the country rather than leaving it. It's not going to result in lower economic growth. More people in the country means that our output can increase, so it may possibly lead to higher economic growth as we're able to move AD to the right. And a rise in the average age of the population. Okay, that's possible that that could happen depending on the age of the people that move to the country. But in reality, an increase in the size of the labour force is the most likely effect. Now, why is that the case? We're told it's a high-income country. So why do people move to high-income countries? They move to work there because the salaries are higher. So the people who are moving or who are immigrating as part of this labour force, well, they're likely to be aged between 18 to 64. In other words, of working age, moving to that country so they can get higher salaries. Okay, 25. Which combination of government actions is most likely to raise the living standards of low-income groups? Okay, so indirect taxes, what are they? They're taxes on goods or services. Personal tax-free allowance is the amount of income you can earn before you have to pay any tax. And spending on healthcare, obviously the more that you spend on healthcare, the better the living standards will be for people. So for indirect taxes, we're going to want them to be reduced, because people will then be able to buy products. Sorry, let me take this away. My mouse is going crazy when I'm recording this video for some reason today. So indirect taxes, we want them to be reduced because people will be paying less for goods and services. And obviously if they pay less for goods and services, then that might result in higher living standards. So when it comes to spending on healthcare, both options are increase, which is good. The more we spend on healthcare, the more the quality of healthcare is likely to be better, and the amount of healthcare that's offered is also likely to be better. When it comes to the personal tax-free allowance, it's better when it is increased, because that means that people can earn more income and have to pay no tax at all. So if personal tax-free allowance was decreased, that would be taking money out of lower income groups' hands or pockets, because they'd be paying more tax even though they have a small income. Okay, 24 is another one from QP11. Go back to that video to have a look at the explanation. 23, why does a government provide public goods? So we talked about this the last time, in the last video also for QP12. Public goods are not profitable for private firms, so that's the reason why. In a free market economy, private firms are looking for profit, and public goods are non-excludable and non-rivalrous. And because of these characteristics that they have, which means that non-excludable means we can't charge a price for it, and because we can't charge a price for it, and because we can't stop people from using it, which is what non-rivalrous means, private firms are not going to be able to charge money for these products, for these goods. So in this case, public goods are not profitable for private firms is the reason why the government has to provide public goods. So they're always used by everyone is not a reason why they have to provide them. It's true, but they are used by everyone, but obviously not always. They can only be provided by monopolies, again, is wrong. Monopolies is just one seller in a market. They'll be searching for profit, so they won't offer public goods. And they create large external costs is also wrong. The type of good that creates large external costs are demerit goods. And we need to reduce their consumption because we want people to have better standard of living. Okay, why is deflation undesirable for an economy? So we'll start at the bottom. It reduces real incomes. That's wrong. Real incomes will actually go up because deflation is where the price level goes down, which means that if we buy something like bread, for example, for 10 yuan in this year, if we have deflation at 10%, that same loaf of bread will only cost 9 yuan next year. So real incomes will actually increase. And that's the exact same with purchasing power. Purchasing power will also increase, not decrease, when we have deflation. Inflation will obviously result in the opposite effect. So inflation will result in purchasing power and real incomes going down. Deflation will result in them both going up. Same for export competitiveness. For export competitiveness, it will actually increase export competitiveness. Because the price of our products go down, that means that when we're selling to other countries, our products are now cheaper. So they can buy them at a cheaper price, which makes us more competitive with the firms in their own countries. However, what it does do is it does reduce business confidence. So inflation and deflation can both result in business confidence and consumer confidence decreasing. And that means that the level of expenditure and the level of investment in an economy can reduce. And we want both of those to increase so that we can increase our aggregate demand. Okay, 21. What is the most likely consequence of increased unemployment? Okay, so remember, when we have increased unemployment, what normally happens? So normally that will be due to a couple of different reasons. It will be AD has gone left or AS has gone left, for example. So what happens? The two of them are correlated. When AD goes left, GDP goes down, national income goes down, living standards go down, and unemployment or employment also goes down. So higher output is wrong. Higher output will be from lower unemployment because AD will go right, national income will go up, living standards will go up, and employment will also go up. Higher inflation is a result of AD moving right. And because we know, as an example, or AS going left, because we know that we've got increased unemployment when AD goes right, we've just explained, price level can rise, income up, living standards up, and employment up. So it won't result in increased unemployment. It will lower unemployment, possibly. Higher self-esteem. Okay, well, I think that one's fairly self-explanatory. If you have a lot of people who don't have jobs, or you have a lot of people who are losing their jobs, they're obviously going to have lower self-esteem. So what will happen is higher government budget deficit. And remember, what does the budget deficit represent? It represents government revenue and government expenditure. And the idea behind it is very simple. When government expenditure goes up and government revenue goes down, we get a higher budget deficit. So if our government expenditure is going down, that means, as it's a component of AD, that AD would move left, which would result in the increased level of unemployment. Okay, question 20. How does a country usually measure its GDP? So I won't spend too long on this. The definition of GDP is given at the start of Unit 4. It's the total value of all goods and services produced within the country. Measuring the average prices of a basket of goods and services, that's what we call CPI, and that's what we use to measure the inflation rate. But remember that the price level and GDP are not inextricably linked. So it's possible for GDP to go up, but for inflation or deflation to actually happen. Subtracting government expenditure from government revenue, we've just covered that. That's not GDP. What that is, it's the government budget. And by surveying the number of people who are out of work but willing to work, that's not GDP. That is measuring the unemployment rate. Okay, question 19. A country wishes to encourage economic growth. So again, straight away before we look at A to D, what are we going to figure out? Well, we're going to figure out that they want to encourage economic growth. We're probably going to be looking to move AD to the right. Yeah? Because economic growth and GDP are linked. There is a strong correlation between the two. So when GDP goes up, economic growth will also happen. If we increase interest rates, that's going to move AD to the left, not to the right, as that's going to be a contractionary monetary policy. So people are going to borrow and spend less money, and they're going to save more money, which means that we have a smaller injection of spending into the economy, and therefore we have aggregate demand moving left. Okay, reducing spending on infrastructure. Again, if we increase the spending on infrastructure, it may be possible for us to move AS to the right, which is another way that we can generate economic growth or potential economic growth. But if we reduce spending on infrastructure, that would be investment, and that would be another reason why, for example, AD would go left. We should all know at this stage that investment is one of the components of AD. Okay, if we reduce the maximum permitted hours of work, people are going to be working for less time. What does that mean? That means that it's likely we will produce less output. And if we produce less output, then GDP will not grow, and therefore we will not have economic growth. However, if we have an increase in spending on education, what's that going to do? That's going to move AD to the right, and in the long run, so over a long period of time, that may also move AS to the right also, because it can increase the quantity and or quality of resources. So remember that our components of GDP, of aggregate demand, are C plus I plus G plus X minus M, exports minus imports. G represents government spending, so therefore if we're increasing a component of this, That's what will move AD to the right. Any of these components go up, AD goes right. Any of these components go down, AD goes left. And increasing interest rates will result in consumer expenditure, which is C, and investment going down. And reducing spending on infrastructure will result in the same effect. Investment, or I, will go down, so AD would go left. Okay, question 18. So what would the government reduce to decrease inflation? So remember, just like the last question, we're decreasing inflation. What are we going to do? We're going to try to move AD to the left, right? So now we're going to be looking for our contractionary fiscal or contractionary monetary policies. And we're talking about reducing each of these. Now if we reduce income tax, what's going to happen is that AD will go to the right. That's an expansionary fiscal policy. If we decrease the foreign exchange rate, that will result in exports going up and imports going down. That's X minus M from our components of AD. So AD will similarly move to the right. Now if we decrease the money supply, AD will go to the left. That's a contractionary monetary policy. So if there's less money circulating in an economy, there will be less spending. And consumer expenditure, which is C, and investment, which is I, will reduce. So that would be our correct answer here. Finally, decreasing the rate of interest is an expansionary monetary policy, and AD would move to the right. People would borrow more money and save less money, so consumer expenditure and investment would increase again. Okay, question 17. A government decides to use a fiscal policy measure. So what do we know they're going to be talking about here? They're going to be talking about taxes or government spending, because that is fiscal policy. So the exchange rate is not an example of fiscal policy, it's an example of monetary policy. Reducing the power of trade unions, reducing the rate of corporation tax, or setting a low interest rate. Reducing the power of trade unions is a regulatory effect. Setting a low interest rate is a monetary policy also. But reducing the rate of corporation tax, we can see it's taxes and government spending. That would be a fiscal policy, and to be precise, that would be an expansionary fiscal policy designed to get multinational companies to move to our country and set up their businesses. Okay, question 16. A government decides to boost the economy through the use of a budget deficit. What target should it adopt to achieve its aim? So remember, what's a budget deficit? If we're trying to use a budget deficit, we're trying to have government spending or government expenditure to go up and or government revenue to go down. So that's what we're going to be looking for in our answers. So direct taxation should exceed indirect taxation. That's not going to boost a budget deficit because we don't know if we're collecting less tax or more tax. Export earnings should exceed import expenditure. What's that going to do? That's going to affect a trade deficit, right? Or it's going to create a surplus if we're exporting more than we're importing, but that's not a budget deficit. Savings should exceed government investment. Again, that's not a budget deficit because we know it's only the money they spend and the revenue they collect. So D is our correct answer here. Government spending should exceed government revenue. So deficit, expenditure is higher than revenue, and a budget surplus, government revenue is higher than government expenditure. Okay, question 15. Why might one profitable oil drilling firm wish to take over another profitable oil drilling firm? So, in these cases, the main reason why we would have a firm taking over another profitable one is because they want to reduce their costs per unit. So they want to achieve essentially economies of scale through growth, right? So by taking over another company, they may be able to reduce their average cost of production. It's not going to reduce the amount of corporation tax they pay, because they'll still pay tax on the profits they make from the combined company. And it's not going to get to get closer to its customers to increase sales, because they'll just be taking over the customers from the other ones. It might not result in a sales increase. It might in the future if they can monopolize the market, but as of now it would just be to achieve economies of scale. And it's also not going to bring suppliers into the same firm. They are probably going to keep with the separate supply chain for the moment, and they might integrate that supply chain over a long period of time. Okay, a firm provides personal service to its customers. It prefers to remain labor intensive rather than capital intensive. What aspect of remaining labor intensive would support the choice? So we're looking for a benefit or an advantage of labor intensive production, which is using people instead of using machines. So quality of customer service is worse. That is definitely not an advantage, right? That's given as a disadvantage for sure. Production is less flexible, and production costs are higher would also be disadvantages, right? They would not be advantages. But we're saying to support the choice has to be an advantage. So the only advantage from the list we can choose is that customer satisfaction is higher. A trade union states that its members have experienced a loss in real income over the past 5 years. What must have happened for this to be true? So without even looking at the question again, what's real income? Real income is the salary increase that they would get minus the rate of inflation. So in this case, if income tax rates have increased, well, first of all, what's that going to do? That's going to put less money in people's pockets. Prices have risen, so that's the rate of inflation. Now that could be true, but they might have got a salary increase that's higher than inflation. Savings have fallen, again that could be true, but it doesn't give us any information about salary increases or about the rate of inflation. So D is the correct answer. In order for there to be a loss in real income, inflation had to be higher than the salary increase that people were given. So after they adjust it, the wages have actually fallen in terms of real income. Now to give you a very simple example, if I get a salary increase of 2% and the rate of inflation over the year is 3%, then what I'm actually left with is a loss in real income of minus 1% over that year period. Okay, 12 and 11 are both from question paper 11. Again, look at that paper for the detailed explanations. Correct answers are D and D. Same with 10 and 9. Correct answers for 10 and 9 are B and B. Explanations are on the QP11 video for this same October-November 2022 sitting. Okay, question 8. What is a possible consequence of market failure? So, consumers have complete information about goods. That is not a consequence of market failure. That's a good thing, right? Consequence of market failure, we know that it's going to have to be something that's negative, right? So, we have some goods are no longer demanded. That's a negative statement. Disequilibrium continues. That's a negative statement. And merit goods are undersupplied. Now if we look back on our market failure notes and slides that are available on OneDrive, what we'll find is merit goods will be undersupplied, and that is what will happen due to market failure. Eventually the free market will correct itself, so disequilibrium will not continue in the market in the long term. The price mechanism, aka the market mechanism, will eventually correct itself to return into equilibrium, even if that new equilibrium is at a different point than where we started. And some goods are no longer demanded. Okay, that may be true, but it's not a consequence of market failure. Again, that's the price mechanism or the market mechanism working to say people no longer demand these, so firms will just switch to making different types of goods. However, merit goods will stay undersupplied unless we can have some form of government intervention to try and increase their consumption. Okay, factors that can influence PES. Again, you can go straight to your PES chapter, slides and notes to learn these factors. The factor is the level of spare capacity in the industry. Proportion of income spent on the product, substitutes and the degree of necessity. They are all factors that will influence PED, not PES. So PES is the level of spare capacity that they have, the availability of stocks, time periods, etc. Okay, and also the degree of perishability of the product, which means how quickly does the product go off. And by go off I mean no longer it can be used. So an example is an apple. An apple might last for, let's say, a week, and then after a week you can't really eat it anymore. Okay, the shoppers in a country become worried about a sudden and dangerous rise in air pollution, and so buy more food in case they have to stay at home. As the air pollution spreads, supermarket staff fall ill and the supermarkets struggle to keep their shelves full of food. What will the new equilibrium be? So first we've got to find, and with these questions they'll always give you two directions of change, right? So we'll always have either a shift in demand and a shift in supply. We just have to find out the direction they're going. So let's do it one by one. If people are buying more food because they're worried about what's going to happen in the future, what's that going to do? That's going to shift us to the right on demand. They're demanding more food because they're worried that they may not be able to get it in the future. So we'll move on to this blue point that I've marked here. And if supermarket staff fall ill and the supermarkets struggle to keep their shelves full of food, then what we're going to do is we're going to have a shift to the left in supply. Because we won't have people working or enough people working, so we won't be able to supply the same amount of goods that we were previously. And we're also told they're struggling to keep their shelves full, which is telling us that their supply is struggling to maintain where it was previously. Okay, so the demand, or the diagram shows the demand curves for the only two buyers in the market. Here we've got a regular demand, and here we've got a uniquely shaped one. And they're asking us what will be the shape of the market demand. So remember, these are two individual demand curves for customer 1 and for customer 2. And when we combine the two of them together, what will it look like for the industry, which is the market demand curve? So it's obviously not going to look like A, yeah, because we can see the shape of the second one here, right? So we know that this customer is obviously more price sensitive. They're not going to buy at different levels of price. So therefore, the one that would match up the best with 1 and 2 is C. Now this is an unusual question. You wouldn't expect it to happen. But it can arise from year to year. And why would it not be B? We can see that at B, it becomes perfectly elastic here. But we know that both customers are not willing to buy above a certain price, and their demand or quantity will change. And also here we've got perfectly inelastic for customer number 2. So moving from being perfectly inelastic when there's one customer to being perfectly elastic is just not something that would be represented on a market demand. Here we can see that we're relatively inelastic at the initial point, yeah. So because there's two customers, the degree of perfectly elastic would be halved, and that would be shown on C. Whereas here we can see that we'd be very elastic at the start because we're closer to horizontal. And again, that's not something that would happen if one of our customers in a market of only two people would be shown to be perfectly inelastic at a certain price. Okay, a government decides to move towards a market economy by selling state-owned enterprises. What's a possible motive for this? So, to know this, we have to know what our advantages of the market economy are. And those advantages are, it's more efficient because we don't have any government intervention. So it's more efficient. Consumers will get a greater choice. There's more competition, and therefore the prices of products will reduce. So when we move to a market system, we will not create greater income inequality. We will actually create more income inequality. To extend government control of the economy is wrong because there is no government control in a market economy. To take account of external costs is also wrong. When we move to the market economy, these external costs will be generated and we won't have any government intervention to fix them. But increasing efficiency of production is something that will happen because we'll get more efficient when we've got no government involvement. Okay, in question 3, good question this one. Diagram shows production possibility curves for an economy that produces two goods, sweet potatoes and onions. Initially the economy is operating on PPC1. So what we can see has happened is that we've had a shift from PPC1 into PPC2, right? What does that mean? For sweet potatoes, we're not making more sweet potatoes now after the shift than we were before, making the same amount, but we are making more onions. So that means that onions must have had an increase in quantity and or quality of resources, which is the reason why the PPC will shift in the first place. But for sweet potatoes, their resources must have stayed the same because they have not shifted. So what we're going to be looking for is a reason why onions would have an increase in quality or quantity. So if we go down here, anything that's relating to sweet potatoes can essentially be taken out, as an incorrect answer, due to the fact that we know there is no change in sweet potatoes, and a PPC curve does not tell us about price. It just tells us about how many goods and services we can make. So A and C can go away straight away. Here we've got an increase in training. What's that going to increase? That's going to increase the quality of resources, and a greater use of technology is going to increase the quantity of resources. So D will be our correct answer. If we just look at B quickly, a larger population in the country, okay, that may help us because that may help us to increase our quantity of labour. But again, a reduction in the price of onions is not something that would affect a PPC, because a PPC does not show us price. It just shows us the maximum output for two goods. And 2 and 1 are both from question paper 11 also. Correct answer is C and A. Look at those papers for the explanations. So that's October, November 2022 finished. I hope it helped.